Welcome to this new chapter entirely dedicated to the study of emotions. In this chapter, we want to get a general understanding of how we arrived to develop a certain stigma toward emotions. Why did we develop in our society the discarding attitude toward emotions? Why do emotions seem of so little importance in our scientific knowledge so far? Why do they play a little role in medicine, in science, in our environmental and social studies? How did we get here? And then I will move forward with my arguments for an introduction of emotions in bioethics. I try to summarize the arc of this discarding attitude in a way that is as effective as possible. We start from ancient philosophy with a kind of an understanding attitude toward emotion. We have, for example, Plato in his Phaedrus, in which he describes emotions as something that we might want to keep at bay. So they exist, they are part of the human psyche, of the human being, and Sophia, Greek word for wisdom, knowledge, is the highest human yearning, achievement we can get when we can understand these emotions and we can keep them at bay. So we start from an attitude in ancient philosophy that is not so condemning. They acknowledge the importance of emotions, they recognize how emotions can be disruptive, yet understanding emotions and being able to control them. Plato uses the example of a chariot, the driver of a chariot, and the emotions are represented by a horse that point us always downward and doesn't help our soul to evolve higher, to keep track of our directions. So Sophia, wisdom, is the ability to keep at bay our emotions, to drive forward on our path. Aristotle similarly considered our ability to balance emotions with our rationality as something that allows us to achieve phronesis, meaning practical wisdom, the ability to put reason in practice, to be able to actually understand what we are doing when we are doing it. So emotions just happen to our life and they shape our character, yet it's up to us to decide what we want to do with them. Aristotle gives the example of the sheep that is trying to survive during a tempest. And that's more or less how it is. I mean, emotions can represent this tempest. Nevertheless, the ship has tools, instruments to cope with the tempest. On that, an example that I usually give to my clients of philosophical counseling when they are in emotional distress is, okay, if you know that you're going to be emotionally distressed because you already foresee that at work is going to be tough or your family is going through something difficult, okay, keep in mind that you have to bring the umbrella on that day. Keep in mind that you need to dress with a thicker coat, with warmer clothes on those days. So, emotions are still regarded in ancient philosophy as something, as an important component of our daily life. How and when did the things start changing? Here I found Rukmik analysis very interesting. It's an old article from 1929, but is a very interesting historical overview of how our take on emotions changed throughout history. And he noticed that Neoplatonism and Christianity encouraged a certain disparaging attitude toward emotions. Why? Because we enter into a religious or spiritual, I would say, mindset for which the actual goal of the soul is to detach from the sema, from this tomb, from the limitation of our body that constrains our actual evolution, and to focus instead on our spirituality, on our essence, on our ability to arise. In that sense, Christianity, who took for grand part Christian theory, Christian theology, who took for big part from Neoplatonism and some parts of Platonic thought, developed an idea for which the real life is the life after this one. Plato would call it hyperuranium. Christianity would call it paradise. Neoplatonism were describing this sense as the one, the ability to become whole, to become one. In any case, emotions become a reason to get somewhat stuck into affairs that do not concern our growth, that are not conducive to our well being. To that, we need to add later on Descartes' dualism, which I described in the previous chapter, for which we are res extensa and res cogitans. So our body is something separated from the soul. Again, Descartes reinforces a certain biblical or religious view of life. The goal of our soul is different from the goal of our body. Emotions are side effects of this machine that we call the body. And the side effects, we don't want to pay too much attention to that. Herbert similarly counted emotions as a waste in the upbuilding of the mind. So even if Herbert do not assign emotions to the same part of the machine, in any case, they are a counter, a side effects of something more important, which is our rational mind. To that, we add the zeitgeist promoted by Darwin's The Origin of the Species, of the Species, in which, in fact, he promoted even more so the importance of understanding this machine, of understanding how the body evolved. Studying emotions would derail our knowledge of who we really are and how we truly evolved. So, with Descartes, with the revolution set in motion by Descartes in modern philosophy and Darwin in biology and natural sciences, the focus is moved more on our body, on natural sciences, on the bodily part that make us who we are. In that sense, all the twitches, all the annoyances of our emotions are considered as an inevitable problem that we encounter when we study this machine. Hence, as Foucault will very beautifully write in the 20th century, to deal with these disturbances, we would add stigma, punishment, isolation, because these disturbances are not accepted. If we want to do science, if we want to progress, we need to keep the disturbances aside and behave according to the parameters we discover these machines work with. All that is outside the parameters is not human, does not satisfy us. How did we arrive to this strict distinction? Through the actual organization of science. I mean, the dualism we proposed in philosophy between res cogitans and res extens, although is not as strong as it might have been perceived through the history of philosophy, it became quite strong through the Enlightenment and in the early Romanticism, when we organized how science should have been done, how our studies should have been conducted. So we have here Dilthey and Wundt at the beginning of the 20th century, who propose and put in practice a distinction of Naturwissenschafts und Geisteswissenschaft, so science of nature and science of spirits, spirit, and these two groups of sciences should work on the human machine from two different points of view. If you do science, if you do natural sciences, you will study the biology of this machine, the physiology, the mechanism that put the machine in motion. But you would not pay attention to the emotions, because the emotions are a forgettable disturbance. And if anything, we might take care of emotions when we do theology, when we do psychology, although a certain psychology is considered more within Naturwissenschafts, Wissenschaft rather than Geisteswissenschaft. So we would basically consider emotions as a background noise. There's a lot to take in this very fast, very intense review of the history of emotions. And of course, in my books, you might find a more detailed description of this arc. What is important to take here is how science put at the door emotions as something that does not belong to human beings. If we want to understand human beings, you should read a human being after having removed all the emotional backdrops that might characterize its description. From a certain point on, doing science, so doing medicine, doing psychology, doing architecture, doing biology, doing physiology, would mean to consider the human being independently of its emotional qualities. And I think we know today that emotions are an important component of the human being. And what makes a being human is its ability of proving emotions. Discarding emotions would create a science and later on a world and a technology that is not fit for humans, because it doesn't take into consideration one of the most important attributes of a human being, hence its emotions. It's not surprising that we are creating a society that is emotionally sicker and sicker and emotionally more and more ignorant. At school, we receive educations on different subjects. Very rarely we receive education on what is going to regulate more than half of our life. That is emotional educations. Often, most of us do not know how to handle our own emotional up and downs or mood swings, or to recognize when we start being at risk of depression. And clearly, a society of that kind cannot work for a sustainable well-being for humans and its own environment. A society like this cannot serve the goal of bioethics as it has been described by Potter, Yar, Engelhardt, Reich, the big names who made bioethics. That's why, in my work, I would like to propose an argument for which a knowledge of emotions can certainly help bioethics to thrive and to achieve the goal of sustainable well-being. I was reading, I was describing to you from Potter's reading in a few chapters ago. On the other hand, I think that bioethics has the moral imperative to help human beings to overcome certain emotional problems. If it is true that the goal of bioethics is sustainable well-being for the for the humans and its environment, so animals, plants, this earth as a planet and the system in which this planet is, then bioethics should take seriously emotional problems. It should be an integrative bioethics, a whole bioethics, a bioethics close to the original plan we find in its founders. Thinking of reducing bioethics to a a medical ethics that consider the case without having a full-fledged idea of the human being is not sustainable, does not fulfill the goal. Yeah, of course, it's more difficult to unfold a bioethics of this kind. It remains more difficult to understand for different people belonging to different fields. But it's a moral imperative to gather a full picture, or at least to trust those whose job is to gather a full picture. Philosophers, for example, historians, sociologists, and bring in your own field of expertise to resolve certain problems. So in my work, I wrote down a few arguments for which we need emotions in bioethics. I'm sure there are many more arguments we can create. Here I proposed 4 arguments. First, we need to consider emotions in bioethics because some of the individuals suffering from emotional disorders might encounter strong difficulties in being part of a healthy environment for themselves or others. Let's consider the case of narcissism in different professions. If if we do not consider an emotional problems that a narcissist encounter, then how can we think that we can take care of the environment? I mean, those narcissism. Narcissistic personality disorder, now it's not considered a disorder anymore for various reasons. Nevertheless, narcissistic traits are clearly creating problems for intersubjective relationships and for the environment. I can see that in my philosophical practice, it's visible in scientific studies and on a political, more general level. Having narcissists making decisions for the environment, which could be just the use of technology or the use of green resources or the use of, I don't know, a certain department in a certain hospital, clearly can generate big problems for the well-being of a certain group. It is difficult to fight for a healthy environment at work or in nature or in personal life if you have to work with people who are self-absorbed and emotionally very unbalanced. So how can we think that our society can make wise decisions if we are getting emotionally sicker and sicker and we don't do anything to prevent that? Now, I might be wrong, I might lack resources, but for my studies, I try to monetize the loss we face each year for narcissistic traits, just the traits, and not the personality disorder. For people having narcissistic traits, it's quite impossible, it's quite difficult. I didn't find any study, but it would be very interesting to quantify the loss. Emotional, mental, environmental, medical, social, the loss that we face each year because of the growing number of people suffering from narcissistic traits. And we know how these traits develop. If you live, if you don't receive sufficient care while you are growing up, it might happen that you develop these traits. Nevertheless, parental leave still remains a problem. I don't know, I'm trying here to present to you with these arguments the difficult interconnection and very intricate interconnection of bioethics and emotions. Trying to separate the two would make bioethics not fit for humans and poorer and not capable of reaching its goal, which is again sustainable well-being for ourselves and our environments. Second point, if human beings and their personal and professional lives understood how the intentions that move their emotions are structured, then it would be possible to care better for each other. I mean, if we are emotionally unaware of our lives, of what we do, of what we say, yeah, okay, we can do the best empathy trainings that our organization, that our workplace can provide us. But that would not make us truly empathetic, truly caring, if we are emotionally not curious about ourselves and what we do, what we say. We can very easily hurt each other, and that becomes quite important if we are doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers. Nevertheless, in our workplaces, we might be careful to provide trainings, but quite rarely we are careful of providing emotional education. So it might be possible that we face more than half of our lives without curiosity for our emotions, without connecting with our emotions, living as robots, maybe suffering from sudden, I don't know, chronic diseases or a sense of void growing in ourselves, but life will keep flowing in this way because in our professional environment, it's highly encouraged to not be personal, to keep a strong distance from your emotions. So the more you do that, the closer you get to a professional behavior. Yet, can you imagine a teacher who is incapable of handling its own emotions, or completely not curious about the exploration, the understanding of its own emotions? Will it be a good teacher? Can you imagine a doctor of that kind? Yeah, I think we know how it would be. I'm not sure we all agree that it's the way to go. I'm not sure we can all agree on the fact that it's the best way to take. So this is my second argument. My third argument is our technology is growing. The inventions emerging under the umbrella of artificial intelligence and machine learning technology is growing. Nevertheless, our awareness about our emotional life is not growing, and we might fall into the risk of reproducing in this new language the same biases we face in our personal life. So we might create an emotionally biased and unintelligent, or an emotionally unintelligent artificial intelligence that would be useless or damaging for human beings. If we reproduce our emotional biases, if we reproduce our emotional unawareness on artificial intelligence, chances are that we would transmit, we would pass on our biases into technology, and we reinforce the kind of unhappiness or quiet misery we are living through this time. Fourth reason, emotions are important components of human decisions and behaviors. Understanding their structure would allow us to engage more positively with our environment and to make more sustainable choices to improve it. I mean, if we can connect with our emotions, then we can connect with the environment that sustains these emotions. If we feel full, if we feel whole, then it would be easier to feel the connection with the environment, to positively contribute to the environment. If we are depressed, if we are narcissists, if we are anxious, if we are manic, I don't know, we don't have the emotional reservoir, the emotional energy to connect with the environment, to care for the environment. Although the environment would be key for us to recover from our state, nevertheless, we would live our life detached from ourselves and detached from our environment. And this clearly undermines the quality of our life and the chances of our survival as parts of the ecosystem in which we are living. Is it worth it? I don't think so, again. So here I presented you with 4 arguments in favor to a form of bioethics that is sustainable for our environment. I think it's worth it to consider these 4 reasons. And it's a way to foster emotional well-being for ourselves and our environment. In the next chapter, I will present you with the cases connected to these arguments, with practical cases we can reflect on. For now, thank you for watching. Bye.